Thank you. I'm Michelle Turner from Movement Lesson. I'm here to present gravitational primitive reflexes. A lot of people, or I find that gravity really isn't being presented properly in infant and toddler child development, and that's what I concentrate on, because gravity is the only non-functional force that we have. So assimilating this into reflex integration presentation, my abstract is available in your presentation. I'm certainly not going to read this, but I would like to just dive right into it. So primitive reflexes is an automated nervous response to a stimuli. There's many different stimuli that we have, and gravity, like I said, is the only non-optional force that we are dealing with, and to recognize that in. So gravity is our constant. All other forces, like if I pick something up, momentum, control, are all different options of force that we can use. So gravity, till the day we're born to the day we die, is a constant. And so it really needs to be looked at as a stimuli in regards to how reflexes are responded to. Now, again, it's our greatest stimuli. We have to take away from, which I will explain, that we are not mass, in that sense that we are all organized to fall. We're actually organized not to fall. But the human body cannot function properly without establishing its organization with gravity. Gravity is something that we oppose using rotational movements. So it's our greatest function that we need as human beings. Gravity can tend to fail us as well as we age, as people have been talking about, where gravity is now becoming the dominant, where it shouldn't be. But also it's our greatest purpose, right? It's a perpetual process for us to learn and grow for optimal development. And again, this should contain us to the day we die. We should be working with gravity as our tool to go on cognitively, physically, and emotionally. So when you're looking at gravity, for humans, this is not a pulling force, right? It is when we're special needs. Now, special needs is defined really as a movement, as any organism or any human body that has issues with rotational responses, right? If we have issues with rotational responses, it doesn't matter if we have cerebral palsy, autism, ADD, or going into Parkinson's or stroke, we will have that issue where gravity now wants to succumb to gravity. None of us are worried about falling out of the chair or falling as we're walking, right? But rotation is the first thing that happens when we leave the vaginal canal, and that's the stimuli that we need to create all of our functional movements, and it has to be included. To oppose gravity, we need rotational responses for functional movements, right? And then for reflex integration, optimal input in child development occurs when the body continues to interact with gravity as the stimulus. So one of the first reflexes that you want to look at with gravity, and has been talked about here, is a fetal neutral reflex, right? During this time with fetal development, we are in a stasis where gravity is a neutral and is different than any time that we are on this planet for two major reasons. First of all, we're in amniotic fluid, but second of all, right, we are not creating a force, so we're not intaking or eliminating during this period of time. If we do, it can be deadly to the child or life-threatening or to that of the mother. So it has to be a neutral. The force of gravity cannot be the same like we and I have it during this time. So the brain, the body can expand in all directions in a frictionless environment. When friction occurs within the fetus realm, let's say arthrogryposis, where you have that cord around the neck, and it can even just be a loose nuchal cord wrapping, it can cause friction and issues that can prolong into the development period and respond differently for that human, and it needs to be evaluated. So it is really important to look at how we look at fetal development in that stasis. So again, the effect on the human body is experienced through neutrality. during this stage in the amniotic fluid. We don't breathe, we don't exhale, we don't intake food, we don't eliminate food. So this is a force that we naturally have in our breath, which I'll go on to explain with that. There are no rotational movements during this time, right? Because they're not meant to, again, everything's meant to expand in all directions, and it's very important. So not having that mental experience of gravity just yet, so the body, again, could be in a neutrality for the brain and body to go on and go forth once the birth happens. The breathing reflex. Our first breath is very important. We have foam in the lungs that expands through the palate stripe when we go through cavitation when the baby is born. And it's very important that the force of our breath now acquires the force of gravity. And that first breath is crucial for infant development, toddler development. If that does not happen properly, I can guarantee you, if you can't oppose gravity in the breath, which is the easiest form of gravitation, responses with the human body, you will need some form of therapeutic intervention for your child to go on and to impose gravity vertically, like in walking. There could be delays. I'm not saying the child will never walk, but if you have a really interruption with the breath reflex during this time, it is crucial that it gets recognized as a very important form of early infant development. First breath really is not looked at as that kind of movement. That force of breath is very important. If you see from a child with meth, you'll get the or again, birth traumas, not just oxygen deprivation. The intercostal muscles need to take form. But again, it's that breathing of gravity. Think about a cold balloon going out into a warm environment, that whoosh. Natural full-term delivery is really important. I'm not saying we don't have a healthy baby with a cesarean section, but we really need to look at the whole process that's happening. Was it optimal for that child, and what do we do right at birth versus this wait-and-see attitude, which is very prevalent in most early interventions. This is why we're seeing such an increase in ADD and such an autism, and even cerebral palsy due to a lot of misconnections with movement right at birth. So again, it's not that you have rotational movement during this time, but the reflex again is that organization of gravity, and it's really important for immediate cognition for that child. The absolute horizon is something that I present. It's that ability to have a baby and be able to pass that baby, put down on the crib. They know where they are in space. They don't need a floor still at that time. You and I are very interested in where the floor is, but a baby has this constant, sort of like that plane coming in for a landing. It happens also during this time. It's very important. It just, as looking at lying down, is really just a milestone of being able to exist in space, because they didn't have this during the womb. And so that connection that goes on during this time is very important for the infant to now start developing. All right? And also what's happening during this time is the epidermis. This is where the problem is with prematurity. The growth rate, let's say, the epidermis versus the body mass at this time. The epidermis is there to regulate gravity. Right? We don't really hurt because we got cut. We hurt because that's the first time gravity is poking through there. Almost too, like women with cesarean sections, you feel like your guts are falling out, kind of thing. Because again, that gravity wants to come in. So this absolute horizon and recognizing how did that child integrate gravity at that point is very important when you are working with other reflexes. So now the rotation is starting to happen at this time because it's initiation of gravity, breath, and that's where you're starting to get those movements, right? So it's that line in space is very important. Getting into coming off the floor, when your baby, about 4.5 months, grabbing the feet, you are starting to see that ability through rotational movements where a child now can start to come off the floor. Not through lift load variations, If the child is going into neuromuscular responses or lack of neuromuscular responses, then you're not getting the weight transfer, the transitional skills, and the rotation, right? Use of neuromuscular activity at this time is again, what we think of as, let's say, cerebral palsy, can be very dangerous because, again, the second you're using muscles, you're taking away weight transfer and that rotation, right? So when you're working with a baby and just that play, but the way that they can lift their feet, right, they're able to now start that initiation of cognitive independence, but the extremities are there, establishing, to be able to not only come to midline, but to cross midline during this time. Grabbing the feet is actually a very overlooked milestone. And it's very important going into those pre-vertical skills at the horizon level. You know, you have to remember, during this period, the horizon is the easiest way to deal with gravity, right? That horizontal bit. And so you really need this type of play is that jump into that physical and cognitive progression. Coming to the floor reflex. Now, this is really interesting how a baby, a neurotypical child will reverse and grip their feet down. They're feeling that next level of gravity, where that floor is presenting to them. An atypical child very generally will go head first off of an item. Again, don't leave your baby on the floor. Because don't leave your baby on the bed. They need to be watched. I'm not saying that they're all going to flip around, but around 12 months, again, when they're start going into that going in and out of standing, right, where the floor is very important to them as just different levels that they're playing with, right? And you'll see this as a child plays, that way that their bodies just want to find and seek the floor. We really lose this as adults, right? And that play that they start to have, that they are guiding themselves into a different level of cognition as well as physicalities. And again, the rotation needs to be there because of the way the organization and going into those kind of movements of finding the floor. The falling reflex. Babies really don't fall. If you're looking at a child that are capable of falling, like I said, watch them on the bed. I'm not saying to test me on that aspect. But a baby is not really meant to fall. If you look at a child, they actually go into a squat and they come back out. Really, with children, the act of falling is a part of succeeding, right? You know, like you have to fall a couple of times before you really truly get it. They play with the fall much differently. I'm not talking that, again, if a child hits a rock and they'll go like that, but they should have, again, those vestibular responses. But in general, when you watch a child come to the ground, right, they are really coming in and going down. Now, yes, that's a fall, but that ability to get right back up again has a very important way of gravity taking them to a new level of development. And again, it's not that they got pulled to the ground. Gravity, again, works at the same rate. If I fall down and an apple falls down, it's going to go at the same rate, but none of us walk down the hallway and worry if they're going to fall. The second that happens, age and death are getting very close. The succumb to gravity, and that's why, again, a hip fracture could be, 85% still of pass within a year. And it's not the break, it's the fall that gets into them. And it's a really big interplay of these types of reflexes throughout one's life. But I wanted to establish that this is in toddlerhood. Now we're getting into close to that 1.5 year mark. Your child wants to start going upside down. They're now saying, okay, I'm getting this gravity stuff. I'm going to go and reverse it out. And it's really important. This is a really becoming a very missed milestone. Don't see kids climbing on trees, guys. We need to let them interplay with their bodies in a 3-dimensional sense. That sense of well-being, who they are, where they are in space, is not just where their feet hit the ground. It's where they are in all directions. You know, you'll see kids literally hanging off the couch upside down. or again, looking like, Dad, do this again, Mom, hang me. They need these structures. It's not just for power, it's about having self-propelling motions within gravity, right? That sense of self and who they are really big organizations. This is where you really lose it. Autism, ADD, cerebral palsy, it is very difficult because they haven't mastered, some of them not even the Absolute Horizon, and we're looking to put them into these kind of movements. We've got to take a step back and look at the foundations of how they are responding to where they are in space. And it's very important to their well-being and where they're going to go. You want master level skills, meaning that they're going here to get the doctorate. These skills were played with, and we're not seeing this as much in children, even neurotypical, because they are not being exposed just because of lack of, just environmental things. You're not seeing parks and gymnasiums and playing with things, but it's an important part. And lastly, I really want you to look at the hanging reflex. Right, if you think of the movie Jerry Maguire and they're going through, a child should be able to go through where you hold their hand and you swing them, as they're, and they get that independence. They're with you, but they have their own self. And now they're actually getting propelled through space, minus the floor. They're still connected to your nervous system, but they are going through that and playing with this. And it's a fun way to play. And you're seeing these jumping. And a lot of, too, when you're getting into issues with like sensory integration, I can tell you guys right now, this is where, again, that relationship with gravity is just off. A lot of stimming is literally like in the old days when we were looking for internet, is where am I? Right now I know I'm in Prague, I know I'm in Europe, I can go on and on and on. I'm in the Northern Hemisphere. I don't think about it on a daily basis, but I know where I am. And it comes from experiencing these things as a child. When you have a stim and not knowing where they are in the shape of the rock, and I'm not saying this is for all children with, let's say, autism, but you have to look at, did they go through this process? Do they know where they're at due to the gravitational force? It's with us all the time. We really have to recognize it more in cognitive and physical development. And see, again, go through the world with intent now. They have a force. They're looking to play with that force. We have to offer them the opportunities of such. I want to thank you very much. I know this is a little bit different from what you're used to with looking at reflexes, but gravity is again, one of my specialties. And I want to really thank Dr. Lisa for having us here. And if you have any questions, by all means, thank you.
Because I'm an acrobat and I got really interested in that upside down reflex, and I'm interested also in the origin of the acrobatic moves. And do you think there is a relation the persons that engage in acrobatic activities during the lifetime and this reflex?
Yeah, it's very important that these reflexes, because what the big milestones that people really don't recognize, around 2 to 5 are the spinning milestones. That's when the somersaults start, the rolling down the hill, bicycling, the cartwheel. Now the cartwheel doesn't have to be at your level, but that inversion with motion happens. If you do not go through your spinning milestones, you will not go into master's level skills. There's a progression of all these skills, but again, yes, the way that you play with gravity, not even thinking about it, is really important to our central nervous system. Kids hanging off the couch backwards, watching TV, you're like, what are you doing? Because these are just natural forces that need to integrate into our system, so it's very important.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you're loud. Go for it. I'm from New York. You're from?
I'm a New Yorker.
Oh, okay, me too.
So, first of all, I've been following your work for years. So
oh, thank you.
To see you here. Thank you, Jen. I'm struck with your use of the term gravitational reflex, because many of us have been working with the inner ear, the vestibular system, and I just would love you to connect the dots for everyone here, because we often are working with the first nerve to myelinate, so that eighth cranial nerve, and really looking at changes in gravitation and rotation now.
So the biggest thing that you have to look at there, are you doing adult-based processes? Like if my
I do both.
Right, I'm just saying, if my inner ear has been affected through trauma at my age, right, I might have to go at the trauma first. What you have to look at here is where it was established within the gravitational thing. So looking at the different deviational fields, like right now I'm only talking about optimal development. To her conclusion, I have other research done on like prematurities and so forth. So I don't even have my deviation charts up here with something like that. So even when you're looking at inner ear, we have plagiocephaly and we have issues with absolute horizon. We've got to address where the gravity is first, because let's say with some extreme forms of plagiocephaly, when you just put the cranial patterns just in midline, they'll fall out of midline. Right, so again, we have to learn to assess for movement, and it's really key, and versus just typically just the structure. And so even though someone who's let's say deaf or hearing impaired and has let's say even cochlears, you've got surgery, you've got going on, you've got the weight of the cochlear or even the weight of the hearing aids, to a baby will throw these very much, my sense of gravity. So, but someone who's older, that's why a lot of older people don't want to wear hearing aids, because it just affects these subconsciously. And I just want to draw these out a bit more about where they are in space, instead of that shuffle where they are needed on all that. So,
Wonderful.
I hope that answered you.
Rachel and Israel.